everyone. My name is Tim Cross. I'm senior reporter for Video Week, and this is our panel buy-side view, making CTV deliver for advertisers. And for this panel, our aim is to give a fairly frank and honest look into how the buy-side looks at the opportunity on CTV. We obviously hear a lot about its strengths and benefits from the sell side, but we want to take kind of a look at what buyers think is really good about CTV right now, but also the areas where we're looking for a bit of progress to be made, and the things that they really value in terms of the buying tools that they can use. So we've got four wonderful panelists with us today who I'll let introduce themselves. Alex, we'll start with you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name's Alex Khan. I'm the MD of International for Unruly. Effectively, what that means is I look after all our commercial activities outside of North America.
Mihir.
Hi, I'm Mihir. I'm the head of broadcast at Total Media, the behavioural planning agency, and I oversee all the planning, buying and strategy behind all our broadcast activity.
Kevin.
Hi folks, my name's Kevin O'Sullivan and I'm the Director of Business Development at Amobee for EMEA, and what that encompasses is essentially looking after strategic partnerships for both our advertiser and broadcaster solutions in the region.
This is Nicola.
Hey, so I'm Nicola. I am the head of AV planning at the Seven Stars.
Wonderful, thank you everyone. So to start off, I think it's important to ask, what do buyers actually want from CTV and how do they sort of categorize it? We don't want to go too far into the where it sits in the plan question, because we've got a whole session on that later on. But maybe Mihir and Nicola, like for you guys, what do you want out of CTV and what are its strengths for you?
Nicola, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I think it's pretty obvious that there's quite a lot of growth in CTV viewing, and there's quite a lot of chat around the SVOD fatigue. So I think ultimately what buyers and agencies want is a bit of a unified / kind of simple way of reaching those consumers on kind of CTV screens, whether that's kind of adding incremental reach to an AV campaign. We know that kind of linear numbers are dropping and there's a growth in CTV viewing, so that feels like quite an obvious win. I think there's an awful lot of targeting availabilities with CTV. So that I think that's really important, and working out exactly how that feeds into a plan, whether that's part of the incremental reach stage or whether that's looking at quite lower down the funnel stuff. So more kind of talking to people in market. Seems to be quite a lot of availability and opportunities. So I would say that's kind of definitely the direction that we would kind of want to push it. I think there's a huge opportunity in the flexibility of CTV, and at the moment that's something that clients are kind of calling out for. But also there's that element of it being quite a low cost, easy kind of entry budget kind of level, which means that smaller brands can access TV content in a way that they might not have otherwise been able to do. So what we want from it actually is quite a lot, in short.
Mihir, how about you?
Yes, I would agree with a lot of almost everything of what Nicola has said, and I think from our perspective, the industry talks about CTV as kind of the marriage of TV and digital, and I think for us, we really want to take all the best bits of digital and all the best bits of TV and put it together and kind of leave behind the things that aren't so great. So, for example, TV has always been the mass-reaching media, and that is undoubtedly its best attribute. But with CTV being able to tap into kind of audiences beyond just demographic and kind of location-based audiences, I think CTV offers us a wide range of behaviours and habits that we can target on, which is really great. Which Nicola basically said opens up the lower end of the funnel to TV, which previously TV hasn't necessarily been able to access. I think also it's key to note that often consumers don't distinguish between an advert that they've seen on the big screen and where it's kind of come from. So everything to consumers is TV advertising. So if it lowers the barriers to entry for some of the smaller brands, as Nicola mentioned, then obviously that's a great thing because they can still be seen to consumers as being advertising on TV. In terms of what we want from it, I think it's developing great at the moment. There's the obvious issues, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit later on, but things around measurement and kind of attribution and all those sorts of things, that it needs work. But I think we have to acknowledge that it is a new and exciting space. And I think with time, it will continue to become increasingly effective and important to us as agencies and our brands as advertisers.
So with those sort of strengths and opportunities in mind, how does that affect how advertisers want to buy CTV, both in terms of, I guess, the metrics they're looking at and the creative they're using? Alex, I know, Unruly has been sort of getting to know the CTV space since the Tremor acquisition. What are you seeing in terms of, how they want to buy and run their campaigns?
Yeah, I think it's a following on from the previous comments. What do they want to buy? They want to test it. They want to understand it. It's not the UK is progressing very nicely and at speed with CTV, but it's not at any levels of size or uptake as the US market. So I think you've got a UK market where everyone's talking about CTV. There's a lot of positive around CTV and the fact that it opens up local, regional and national advertising, which you can to some extent do with linear TV, but it's not necessarily as accurate as CTV. And so brands really are in that kind of test phase. They want to have a look at it. They want to see what kind of metrics they can get from it. And they want to see how the audiences respond to a brand engaging with them when they're at their most relaxed time, i.e. consuming content that they've deliberately turned on, which is what's happening with CTV.
Is that aligned with the rest of you guys see?
Yeah, I think so. I think to Nicola's point, I think it does depend on who is planning and buying the CTV. So if it's coming via the investment teams, that's usually they're looking to extend the reach from the linear. I think, as Alex said, CTV it's a great testing ground at the moment for the legacy digital teams because this is the new shiny toy that they get to play with. But I think beyond the actual inventory, the data opportunity is pretty interesting when we look at the likes of ACR data sets, which are pretty new to the UK market. Obviously, we've seen the likes of Gracenote and Inscape be prevalent in the US for the last few years. But you've got the likes of Samba TV here. You've got Samsung ads have now launched their own DSP in the last week off the back of their ACR data set. So I think that's going to play an important role. And then as we look beyond the UK in particular, I think we see a lot of kind of testing with the experiences of CTV, particularly via the HBB TV protocol. We see a lot of brands looking to turn CTV ads into more interactive engagement opportunities. So that's something to keep an eye on in the coming years.
Yeah, I think the data opportunity is obviously important to look at because it's such a huge part of it. What do you make of I guess, it's different from different, broadcasters will have their own data tools that you can use, but do you think at the moment there's a lot of interesting stuff you can do in terms of data and targeting on CTV, or are you still kind of working with a fairly limited set of data tools?
Well, I think it comes down to whose data you're using. If you're looking at the OEM manufacturers, as Kevin said, with the likes of Samsung, LG, you have the ability to use HDMI cable data, which will give you the size of the TV, the IP location, etc. But you also have ACR data, which gives us a more in-depth view as to what's happening with the household, what's being consumed, what they're looking at, which apps are where they're spending most of their time, which OTT apps they're doing and platforms they're engaging with, and which sites they're connecting to. So that is if you look at where the brands are going to try and drive to, that's the data they're after. But if you're the OEM manufacturer, that's your golden goose. You're going to keep that to yourself. And if you look at the way that Samsung operate with their sales team have access to all that. Any third-party partners don't. So data is going to be important because it puts the connection to the consumer into context, i.e. what is being looked at in this household and how do I adapt my my messaging to that data. And then that brings in the whole question around creative execution and how brands begin to adapt their creative execution for the use of CTV.
I think that's a really important point as well around creative execution, because we can't just see CTV as an extension of TV. It can operate as a completely different kind of element to it as well. And brands should use the data capabilities and things like contextual targeting, etc., to make creatives that are more relevant and more appealing to consumers in those moments. In terms of how data is being used, I think it's really interesting how certain data is being shared with agencies. So like Alex said, that if you go through the Samsung ad sales team, you get access to more data than you would if you went through another third party to access their content. So it's obviously kind of their play to keep everyone in one environment, which is completely understandable. But obviously, from a buyer's perspective, eventually you want to be able to buy more inventory in one place, and that's, I guess, one of the biggest challenges of the industry, that it's already becoming a really fragmented marketplace, and a lot of that is down to kind of the different layers of data that each provider can kind of supply for their own inventory.
Yeah. I think we'll talk a bit more about the fragmentation issue a bit later on, because it's definitely a big one. But I want to look for a bit at the reality of CTV supply in the UK and Europe. We've been working on research on the reality of CTV in Europe, and what we've heard sometimes in the UK is this idea that CTV at the moment is mostly just the BVOD services and YouTube on connected TV sets that buyers are interested in, and that's sort of where all the value is. Nicola, is that sort of in line with how you see it?
Yes, I would say at the moment. The trouble is that the broadcasters have the best content, and they have a wealth of data, and they have a hell of a lot of inventory behind it. So that has to be the kind of the biggest selling point of CTV. I think as well, it's familiar to clients, and they understand the content that they're going to be around, which is nice, and they fully trust it. It's brand safe. There's no fraud, and it's a comfortable place for brands to want to spend. That being said, we know that there is still value in the long tail. The smaller kind of there's lower numbers, but the way that those impacts and impressions are being traded are really interesting, and there's lots to be learned from those kind of long tail inventories by the broadcasters. But obviously there's a difficulty in that because it's not unified. We need to find a kind of solution to make that feel more accessible. But for now, I think broadcaster VOD and YouTube feels like, I mean, it's the bulk of the inventory, and it's the content that clients definitely love being around.
Yeah, again, I'd completely agree with that. And I think what Nicola said around the familiarity is one of the key things, the fact that even being on CTV, your brands can still have presence in the likes of whatever it is, Coronation Street, Britain's Got Talent, etc. For them, that's a really, really big deal. However, we talk so much about the growth of AVOD in this country, and how it's in Europe in general, actually, and how it is really kind of taking over in terms of people's viewing habits and stuff. For our clients, and I know this is probably a TV legacy thing, it's more clients always, or not always, often talk about programs that they watch, and they relate their brand back to that. And I guess if you're talking about some really niche AVOD content, which is really great and professional content now, it's not kind of like user generated content, it's really, really good. Often they shy away from it because it's something that they're not necessarily aware of. But again, that's up to us as kind of agencies and planners to move away from kind of the small-minded that, if I don't watch it, then the rest of our brand's audience won't watch it.
Yeah. I mean, you think this problem's going to sort of sort itself to an extent as the smaller AVOD platforms and services grow? I mean, there's been like a few stories this week. I know Pluto TV have picked up Narcos from Netflix, which is a pretty big show, like one of Netflix's originals, which sounds like a pretty good one for them to have. And we reported about Imdb TV, which is Amazon's free service. I don't think they've announced it yet, but they've started posting for jobs to run that in the UK. So that's coming over here, and that's a bit of a weird one because you don't hear tons about it here. But I think they've got tons of content on it, and obviously it's got the financial heft of Jeff Bezos behind it. So do you think we're going to just see over the next few years these services grow, and then there will be a lot more value outside of the broadcasters and YouTube?
I don't think we can ignore the rise and the increasing popularity of the AVOD scene, and from the OTT platforms. You've got the likes of Roku, Pluto, Viacom, who all have relevant content. Look at the amount of popularity or the growth in popularity in the last 7-8 months of Disney with Disney Plus. They've put on 10 million in APAC alone. They put on 10 million subscribers in 5 months.
Yeah.
You just can't look at that and say, I get the BVOD situation, and I get why they want to keep almost a walled garden situation. And you can see that with ITV's launch of Planet V. But in reality, when as an industry, we're trying to get brands to understand, if you're buying an audience, it's the same as you're buying an audience online in traditional in-stream or outstream. You're buying the audience. You're not necessarily buying the content association. And none of these platforms, in terms of the OTT ones, have any inferior content to BVOD. And you've just highlighted one where they actually have as good, if not in some cases, better content. But what is happening is it might be older content, and it might be taken from stock library, but it still has a loyal following. It still has an audience. And if I look at the research that we've just done at Unruly, we've just done a whole CTV research, US, UK, and some in APAC. And you're looking at, there's a definite rise. Probably a third of the users will end up going AVOD route as opposed to staying with an SVOD. And of that, about a third again will keep both. So you're talking about 2/3 going to a full AVOD solution. So the content, when that filters through and the popularity arrives at on the demand side and the growth of those channels or those platforms, so will their ability to buy more up-to-date and relevant content. So we shouldn't ignore that. I mean, there is value in having. That's why every TV company in the world shows repeats, because they're popular and people want to watch it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an important thing to look at, particularly on the UK CTV scene. There is going to be increasing popularity for these OTT platforms.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with you, Alex. I think it's going to be great for the industry. I think when we look at the BVOD side of things, we just need to remember that there's reasons why they get a lot of the budget. It's because they have the strict AB booking deadlines, and there's a lot of incentives to book campaign budgets with those services. So I think those kind of, if you were to think of it as a boulders, rocks and sand, the boulders are still going to be the broadcasters, but I think more of the revenue will kind of drift down to the OEMs and what we call the long tail. But as you said, the content there is just as good. And sometimes it's even more relevant when we look at niche publishers within the CTV space.
Alex, you mentioned there Planet V, and that's definitely something I want to talk a bit about, is the emergence of these sort of self-serve buying platforms, because we've seen other examples. Hulu in the US launched one recently, earlier this year. What do you think are the strengths of these sort of buying tools where it's still direct to the broadcaster, but it's using a self-serve sort of system? I mean, Kevin Amobee sort of works with broadcasters to produce these sorts of tools, including on Planet V. What do you think are the strengths of those sort of tools?
Yeah, I might be slightly biased on this one, but I feel like there is a lot of strategic value to both the broadcasters and also their clients. Obviously, agencies are responsible for purchasing the vast majority of linear TV, and therefore it makes sense for them to build solutions that they can offer in partnership with those agencies for their, well, specifically the ITV hub inventory today and what they will offer in the future there. I think from the broadcaster side of things, what they need is they need to be comfortable to offer their inventory and data to buyers, knowing that they are able to protect that. I think they've kind of sat in the background and they learned some of the lessons from some of the more traditional display publishers who maybe got burned a bit by some of the big tech players. So I think broadcasters are in a good position to actually kind of take control of their own destiny. And obviously that's going to lead to things like fragmentation, because if you need to use 10 different buying platforms to access 10 different publishers, that's going to be problematic. And I feel sorry for the agency guys who are actually going to have to train teams up on that. But I think it's the job of technology vendors and broadcasters who are building these tools to ensure that they add enough value to make it worthwhile. And I think it's open knowledge at this stage that ITV are looking to bring additional supply into that ecosystem to make it worthwhile kind of spending your budgets there.
Yeah. I mean, I know I've certainly heard from plenty of agency people who say they've been sort of rubbing their hands together with excitement, waiting to try out Planet V. Mihir and Nicola, what's your thoughts on it? Is it, how big of a development is it for you guys, and how useful are those sorts of tools generally?
I think the first thing to say is obviously it's amazing to see the broadcasters innovating and continuing to innovate given the current times and the challenges they've had, particularly this year in terms of advertising revenue. In terms of, I guess Kevin kind of covered it where he said that if there continues to be increased fragmentation, obviously it becomes a bit more of a difficult space for us as buyers. But if ITV secures some of this other published content on the platform, then it almost becomes a buying utopia for the buyers and the teams like mine and Nicola's, I guess. It's also really interesting because traditionally when we've bought broadcast VOD, it's just been a conversation over the phone or email with the people at ITV or All4 or Sky On Demand, whichever platform we're using. And you talk to them about the targeting capabilities and they'll just come back to you with a CPM that is either standard for your agency or they've added a layer to it and it's become more expensive. And you don't really know what that's done to the universe size or why it's become more expensive. You just kind of just accepted it. At least now with the likes of Planet V, you can literally see as you add a layer to it of targeting, what that does to CPM, what that does to the potential universe size. And I think obviously this is not new in our industry, but to the TV world, it is new to TV buyers. And I think that's a really useful tool for us to see in the conversations that we can have with clients off the back of that as well.
Yeah. I think, sorry, go on, Nicola.
I was just going to say, I think it's really important that we do have those like opportunities to kind of delve into Planet V and see the different types of targeting, because as Mihir kind of mentioned, when we usually brief in a VOD campaign, I think it was quite surprising when you go through all the targeting capabilities on Planet V to see all these opportunities that we have, but we weren't necessarily we didn't really know that we had them. So I think it's a great opportunity for buyers to just educate themselves on the opportunities, but also to feed back to Planet V and ITV and all the other broadcasters that this is what we need, and maybe this is not what we're quite getting at the moment. So I think it's a great first step in the direction of how we buy.
Yeah, I think like outside of the BVOD services and their individual sort of siloed buying tools, how big is the opportunity, do you think, for real-time bidding-based programmatic buying? Because obviously that's going to be more for leftover inventory, long-tail stuff. Do you think there's a big opportunity there yet, or will there be shortly in the future as supply improves?
I think a lot of it will depend on the level of data that's actually passed through in the bid stream, because going back to the data side of things and targeting, and also there needs to be a critical mass as well, because in order to cherry pick impressions from a pool of inventory, there has to be enough of it for you to decide which ones you want. And I think up until this point, we've been talking a lot about CTV and nearly bigging it up before it fully got here in a sense. But I feel like this year we've seen a huge shift towards increased viewership of CTV because of the pandemic and other reasons. And just generally people upgrading their TV devices, that alone increases the scale of CTV in market. So I think when you look at some of the publishers that are making inventory available, there's efforts to hide certain information like truncating IP addresses or masking postcodes. Obviously they do that for a reason, but I think you obviously need to have direct conversations with these sort of sellers and publishers to ensure that you're getting what you want.
Mm-hmm.
I think that also that plays into what Kevin said. It will give the OEMs a real chance to show what they can do, especially when for the likes of Mihir and Nicola and their colleagues, you're in a position where these guys, the Samsungs, the LGs, Sony, if they have critical mass on connected TV, these are the ones that have the purest form of first-party data, because they can tell you what the size of the TV is, what the connection speed is, what programs are being watched, how long they're being watched for, how long do they take, do they binge, do they not binge, all this kind of stuff that when you're formulating a strategy and a buying plan for a client, you ideally would want to get your hands on. The challenge, as Kevin said, is you've got to have critical mass. The moment you start layering data on or layering frequency caps on, you're cutting your inventory in swathes, not in small amounts, in large chunks. And is the market ready for that yet? Maybe, maybe not. I would suspect that not even Planet V has enough volume to deal with 3 or 4 layers of targeting on it. Will that be the case going forwards? Maybe not. You know, they have one solution for the demand side. There are other SSPs out there, such as their own, that have other solutions that are able to provide equally large volumes of CTV inventory. But I really think that the way this is going to play out, and given the kind of comments that from the demand side, we will see the rise of the OEMs, and they will play an increasingly part, not least because they're the ones that will shift the hardware. They will sell the TVs to the consumer.
I want to take a look finally, and this is sort of related to that, but a few of the things commonly cited as blocks to investment in CTV. So one is measurement or the lack of it. Have we made significant progress over the last few years, and is it still something of a block to investment in CTV for buyers?
Yeah, I think we are beginning to make strides now. I saw just the other day that SpotX and the Audience Project have seemingly put out a pretty robust measurement tool alongside TechEdge, which is a platform that most agencies use in terms of measuring and planning. I know that Audience Projects have been focused on this for a long period of time, but it just the key thing, I think, for us, I don't know if Nicola thinks the same, but we often talk about CTV being able to add incremental reach to TV because the lighter viewers tend to be consumers of CTV inventory. And still, at this moment in time, I don't think there's a way of kind of measuring deduplicated reach between people watching linear TV and people watching CTV inventory. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that is probably still the biggest challenge to us as buyers. I don't know if you think the same, Nicola.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. I think there's definitely a job to be done to kind of unify that kind of planning process, and then the buying process. But the reporting element is so important, and that learning from exactly why we're putting CTV on a plan. How much incremental reach is it adding? We should be able to, you know, similar to what we do with BVOD, and it's taken us a while to get there, but to understand exactly what that's adding to a plan, and then being able to say afterwards, yeah, tick a box, and that's what it did. But until we get there, I think it's going to be quite difficult to put. I mean, we've kind of covered a lot of the reasons, but the trust element, kind of seeing names and even down to the language, like the acronyms and language that people don't really know what it means. That's quite, to clients. If clients are busy, they've got a lot going on, and if there's not the scale behind it and it's quite complicated and we can't see what it's delivered afterwards, then you can totally understand why a client might say, I don't feel comfortable. It's almost a bit too early. So I think the reporting element and being able to prove exactly why we're including CTV on a plan is really, really important.
I mean, obviously, related to trust, we still hear a lot of quite worrying stories about the level of fraud on CTV. Obviously, that's only in certain parts of the ecosystem, but is that also something that clients tend to be worried about? Is that a block to investment?
I'm not sure it's a block. It's a definite, and Mihir and Nicola could talk to this probably more firsthand, but from our point of view, it's a definite question. And it's a question that gets asked. And if you've been in programmatic a long time, you're seeing the same cycle of questions coming back that came with display, that then came with video, and then came with programmatic, and then and now quite rightly the clients are saying, well, what do we read in the press about fraud, what's actually happening? And those who are progressive on that will try and put in place the steps and measures that they can to help clients feel at ease, and our agency partners feel at ease at that. You know, for us, we use Double Verify, and we use it on a pre-bid basis so that they have the fraud filtering capabilities before we spend any client's money. You know, that's one solution that's there, but it comes down to, there has to be more commonality around this. There has to be more cooperation around this, and there has to be a level of understanding that, you know, at this moment in time, I don't believe there's a one size solution fits all, but everyone is trying to pull in the right direction.
Yeah.
I think fraud is always going to be an issue in an open ecosystem. Bad players will always follow the budgets. It's inevitable. I think, not to harp on about Planet V, those sort of closed ecosystems would do a lot better job at protecting buyers from fraud, because it is in itself a closed ecosystem. But as Alex said, I think it's up to the technology platforms to offer the assurance that fraud will not be a problem within other environments. So I know most DSPs today and SSPs will have some form of fraud guarantee, with the likes of White Ops and DV uncovering kind of sophisticated fraud schemes all the time. It's not easy to get past these guys. There's a reason why DV are now being floated at nearly $5 billion as of this week in an IPO. So they're doing something right. But no, it is, as Alex said, it's something we need to keep on top of. And I think it's through kind of collaboration that'll happen.
Brilliant. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. But it's been very interesting to hear about the realities of the opportunities in CTV at the moment, and good to hear that progress is being made on some of those thorny issues that at points might have blocked investment before. So thank you very much to all my panelists.